This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the stockbroker clerked, Lady Frances Carfax disappeared, and Bruce Partington planned, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever wondered what a commissionaire does? Or what a compositor is? Or of the difference between a stevedore and a stoker?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 425. Disguise is key. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
Are you sure? I don't recognize you.
Well, that's because I'm currently invisible, but it won't last long. I intend to douse myself with talcum powder so that I'll emerge as sort of this white, formless shape, which is how most people see me even when I don't do that.
But you smell so nice with the baby powder. I love it.
Yeah, but I can't inhale. That's the problem.
Well, we'll dust you off and we'll start over again.
Oh,
Perfect.
Excellent.
Well, this is the third episode of the month, and that means it is one of those episodes called Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist, where we take a look at a piece of Sherlockian scholarship about some trifling observation in the stories, and we bring it to you. And in this case, we are delving into the autumn 2014 issue of the Baker Street Journal, volume 64, number 3. We are looking at an article called Disguise is Key, Germans in the Canon. It's written by Maria Fleischhack, a member of the Baker Street Irregulars. Meanwhile, we would ask that you join us as a paid subscriber, if you can afford it, for as little as $1 a month on Patreon or over on Substack. And as a bonus, just to entice you, we just started a new series called Trifling Trifles, where we look at minutiae, true minutiae in the canon that doesn't warrant a full-length episode. So we'll be bringing you Trifling Trifles on the, well, I was going to say on the regular, probably more on the irregular moving forward. But it is bonus content that is just for you to show that we appreciate your support. We also, as a bonus, enter all of your names, if you are a paid supporter, into a drawing. At the end of every month, we put you into a big barrel. Well, not you, but your name, and we revolve it, and we choose one name at random, and that person gets a free back issue of the Baker Street Journal, from where we get some of these lovely Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist topics. So if that interests you, check out our Patreon and Substack links. They are patreon.com/trifles and trifles.substack.com. Well, this is an interesting episode because it harkens back, kind of provides a nice parallel piece to an episode we did in season 3. My goodness, 6 years ago in January of 2019. Which was the first episode in our international series where we looked at Germans and Sherlock Holmes. And I like the idea of looking at this particular piece of scholarship because it's a different angle to Germans and Sherlock Holmes, and I think Maria is the perfect person to do it.
Yeah, I very much agree. You know, it's oddly timely. Well, it's unfortunately timely in that so much of current cultural confusion and discussion seems to be about race, nationality, acceptance. And when you think about Germany and Britain, and you think about the experiences of World War I and World War II, many aspects of the emotions surrounding those terrible events spring up. And here, Maria Fleischhack, who was, as you say, invested in 2018 as Rache, and when she wrote this back in 2014, she was a lecturer in English at Leipzig University, has a wonderful perspective. She begins with a lovely little abstract. She says, the Sherlock Holmes cases are full of international characters. We meet people from all over the world, and Conan Doyle, of course, was always aware that he was a member of an empire. He was one of its foremost patriots. But, she says, he seems particularly fond of Germany. And when you read his autobiography, you find that he felt saddened by the Anglophobic attitude he met among Germans in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He seems disappointed that a country and a culture he appreciated so much should not return the sentiment. In light of, and so now that's an interesting, Anglophobic attitude. I guess she must mean the anti-Anglophobic attitude he met among Germans in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He seems disappointed that a country and a culture he appreciated so much should not return the sentiment. Met among Germans, interesting. But in any case, she says, how are Germans portrayed in the canon? And let's take a look at Conan Doyle's personal accounts of his experiences with Germans, and then analyze the major German characters in the canon.
Yeah, and I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, but Maria sets this out. She said when Conan Doyle was sent to stay at a Jesuit school in Feldkirch, Austria, for a year. It was 1875, and he met a number of German students who had also been sent to Stella Mountatina. That is the Jesuit school, Stella Mountatina, by their well-off families. And he remembers his year abroad fondly in his biography, and particularly because the conditions at this Jesuit school were much better than they had been at Stonyhurst. And if you follow Conan Doyle's memoirs, you'll know he was no fan of the very extreme conditions at Stonyhurst, which were enough to eventually turn him against religion later in life. They stuck with him that long. But he was not as well versed in the language as other students. It didn't come along as well as he hoped. And so he befriended mostly English-speaking students while he was there. But he traveled 15 years later, in 1890, he traveled to Berlin to hear Robert Koch give, is it Koch or Koch or Koch? Or there's so many different pronunciations here.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's Koch.
Robert Koch give a presentation on his newly formed remedy for tuberculosis. Was unable to gain entrance to the lecture hall. So as he was crestfallen, he ran into Dr. Henry J. Hartz, an American, who promised to share his lecture notes with Conan Doyle later on. And he thought eventually his assessment of this remedy for tuberculosis was experimental and premature. Of course, let's remember that Conan Doyle had a bit of a personal stake in the game because his first wife, was suffering from tuberculosis.
Well, see, now what I did earlier was I misread the word Anglophobic, and she's got that absolutely very correct. Anglophobia, meaning negative towards the English. And so what happens is that Conan Doyle remembers his visit and other instances. And in his memoirs, he recounts examples of the rude behavior of the Germans towards him as British. And he came to feel that Germany's lack of respect for England was really deleterious to the German government and empire, and might limit its future. He was crossing the Atlantic with his brother Innes on a German liner, and he finds only German and American flags in the ship's saloon, despite the fact that most of the people on the boat are British. But, however, he takes pride in the fact that his book about the Boer War is translated into German. And in his memoir, he remembers seeing a distressed German soldier who came to London to discuss with him the hatred of the British that Conan Doyle described experiencing among Germans. The soldier arguing that one day England and Germany would have to come together to fight Russia. And then, of course, Conan Doyle was involved in a car race. He was a great automobile enthusiast in 1911 that was organized by Prince Henry of Prussia. And he's full of praise for German racing and all of that. But he says there was very little love lost on either side, though I, as one of the few German-speaking competitors, did my very best to bring about a more cordial atmosphere.
Yeah, this is interesting that he admits that he didn't believe in what was then called the German menace leading up to World War I, and says that within one generation, imagination and misrepresentation have destroyed Imperial Germany. And even during the First World War, he speaks of Germans rather technically and respectfully, although he was aware of the danger.
Well, and then Maria takes us off into the canon, the first German reference in the cases of Sherlock Holmes, of course, being her investiture, the word Rache, written on the wall in Study in Scarlet. And she tells us a little bit about Count von Kram, also known as the King of Bohemia, in Scandal in Bohemia. And she describes the king, Watson's description of him. The king is passionate, somewhat slow on the uptake, comes across as a helpless child turning to Holmes in desperation. In light of the British royal family's German origins, it seems risky to describe a member of German royalty in such a way. And it's a fictional house, of course, Cassel-Felstein, that's not related to the house of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, which is the house of Queen Victoria's mother, or the house of Hanover, which was Victoria's father, or to Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which was her husband, Prince Albert's. So Conan Doyle was treading carefully, but this Cassel-Felstein from Bohemia, which was the western part of the Czech Republic, seems like a safe bet. And, she points out, he could have been thinking about Franz Joseph I of Austria, who was king of Bohemia at the end of the 19th century. He had a richly adorned dress uniform that corresponds with Watson's description of von Ormstein. And, of course, Irene Adler has a German name as well. While Irene means peace and is of Greek origin, Adler means eagle and is firmly rooted in German, and she's a master of deception. And in contrast, the king and Sherlock Holmes turn out to be helpless.
That's interesting. I never noticed that about Irina Adler's name before, but Maria makes a good point. Another German character we see early on in the stories is Colonel Lysander Stark and his wife from The Engineer's Thumb. They are obviously pretending to be someone they're not, but Stark continues to, put this pretense forward until Victor Hatherley discerns what's going on. And Stark's wife is worried for him, and Hatherley figures out the machine, and of course the colonel sets the machine on Hatherley at that point. The walls are closing in. And we see that the engineer Hatherley later learns the real names of the colonel and his wife, Fritz and Elise. These are two extremely common German names, Maria says. And Watson remarks that neither the beautiful woman nor the sinister German were ever seen again. Deception. Once again, deception in connection to German characters happening here in the engineer's thumb.
Well, and then Maria takes us on sort of a quick step through some of the major appearances of Germans elsewhere in the canon. She remarks that Colonel Moran's air gun, it's built by the blind German mechanic named von Herder. And Holmes is impressed by the weapon. He knows about the mechanic, describes it as admirable and unique. This reflects the respect Conan Doyle had for military inventions and German workmanship, which lasted well into the First World War. And then there's Heidegger, the German teacher in the Priory School. The reader and most characters in the story are ready to believe that it's Heidegger who kidnapped the young boy. But no. And that gives you the rather unexpected discovery of the body of the teacher. And as you find out, he was trying to save the boy. And then she takes us to the Valley of Fear. Here we meet the second German woman in the canon, Jacob Schafter's daughter Eddie, described as young and singularly beautiful. Her German accent is pleasing. Leslie Klinger notes that Eddie became Swedish in the Strand Magazine version, as it was impossible to write such a German character as being positive during the war. But, she says, Conan Doyle did not give up on his idolization of Germans even after the war had started. He wrote Eddie as a perfect image of a Victorian woman. The presence of Germans, of course, in Pennsylvania in the case is historically likely. But there's Conan Doyle writing about a beautiful, trustworthy woman, passionate German woman in 1914. And then she takes us to His Last Bow.
Ah, yes, the probably most famous appearance of Germans in the canon. Von Bork and von Herling, the two German spies here. And we know that von Bork has been part of an intelligence operation for at least 2 years, and he's described as highly intelligent and successful. Although, and this is key, he's dismissive of the English and their lifestyle. We'll see how that plays out. But he's a villain who is nevertheless respected by Sherlock Holmes because of his craft and his cunning. And we see the mocking von Herling has over Martha, right? The old stately housekeeper. She might also she might almost personify Britannia with her complete self-absorption and general air of comfortable somnolence. And it seems, Maria writes, that of all the Germans in the canon, Holmes has the most respect for the most dangerous one. He says of von Bork, "But you have one quality which is very rare in a German, Mr. von Bork. You are a sportsman, and you will bear me no ill will when you realize that you, who have outwitted so many other people, have at last been outwitted yourself. After all, you've done your best for your country, and I've done the best for mine, and what could be more natural? Besides," he added, not unkindly, as he laid his hand upon the shoulder of the prostrate man, "it's better to fall before some more ignoble foe."
Well, with these examples, how can we sort of draw a line over this and sum up Germans in the canon? Maria says, generally speaking, German characters in the canon appear to be either hiding their true identity or that of someone else, or to be deceptive. German women, well, they're good-hearted, gentle, crucial to the well-being of the protagonists. German men who do not strive for a criminal career are helpless, like the King of Bohemia, the German teacher, or Eddie's father. Colonel Stark would easily get away with murder if it wasn't for his wife, and von Bork, who is probably responsible for many more deaths than Stark, is depicted as a villain, yet somebody who is good enough to be respected by Sherlock Holmes.
Well, there you have it. Well,
Well, and she does she does sort of put a cap on it and says, the use of German characters in order to mislead could be accidental. These could be spur-of-the-moment decisions. But, the author himself was quite fond of Germany and Germans. I believe he carefully considered his choices. Of course, when you do this sort of analysis, you can't really suppose the opinion of the narrator is the opinion of the author. But it seems quite obvious that Conan Doyle's ambiguous feeling of being a Briton who felt scorned by Germans and yet respected Germany, even in times when he should have taken an anti-German stance, it shines through the Sherlock Holmes stories, especially those penned during the First World War.
And, it's an extraordinary time that Conan Doyle and his counterparts lived through, from the time of Bismarck and, Imperial Germany to where it ended up. It makes you wonder what his impressions would have been if he had lived, say, another 10 or 15 years to see World War II happen. And, it's an extraordinary transformation of the Germanic people during that time period.
I, for one, am happy he missed it.
And that is no trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
This account of you we have from all quarters received. Only a German is so uncourteous to his verbs.